Well, good morning everyone, and can I welcome everyone to Development Control Committee A. Can I just first of all run through some of the domestic arrangements, please? Can you please ensure that you maintain social distancing from other persons in the chamber and in the social areas? Please ensure that you wear a mask unless you are speaking, or if you're unable to do so, that you use the hand sanitizers and wipes provided. Please maintain social distancing at all times during the meetings and any breaks. Please ensure that the microphones are muted when you're not speaking. Please do not interrupt other speakers. Members are reminded that they should not have alternative communication lines open, i.e. Teams chats. And if you are contacted by a third party during an application before us, please bring it to the attention of the legal advisor. Please note that if you are attending the meeting to speak, please do not interrupt the meeting, or you may be asked to leave. Additionally, you'll be invited to speak and ask questions by myself as chair of the meeting, and we'll be using e-voting for this meeting on modern.gov. I'd like to remind everyone present this meeting is being broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewings. The whole of the meeting will be recorded, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to this meeting, you'll be deemed by the Council to have consented to being recorded. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you're also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those sound recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. The Council's member of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and press are not lawfully excluded. So welcome everyone. I'll just run through some of the people that are here with us today. So we have Ian Deprez, who's our legal advisor. We have Philip Isbell, the Chief Planning Officer, and John Patemangy, the Area Planning Manager. Robert Carmichael, the Governance Officer. Daniel Cameron and Badley Heffer, who are presenting. We have, in charge of IT, Mandy and the team. I don't know who's joined you, Mandy. Alicia, welcome. And then we have the ward members today for today's applications will be Councillor Helen Gee, Councillor Sarah Mansell and Councillor Andrew Mellon. So I think that covers it all. Okay, so we'll move straight into agenda item number 1. Apologies for absence and substitutions. Do we have any, please?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies this morning from Councillor Richard Mayer, Councillor Rachel Eburn and Councillor Tim Passmore. And we have substitutions of Councillor James Carston for Councillor Mayer, Councillor Roland Warboys for Councillor Eburn and Councillor Susie Morley for Councillor Tim Passmore.
Thanks very much. Okay, agenda item number 2 is to receive declarations of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest by members. Do we have any to declare? None received. Thank you. Agenda item 3 is declarations of lobbying. Certainly on the second application before us today, I've received multiple emails, as have all the members apart from those that are substituting. Okay, thank you. Declarations of personal site visits. Does anyone need to declare a personal site visit? None received. Thank you. Agenda item number 5 is a confirmation of the minutes of the meeting that were held on the 12th of May 2021. That are before you. I'll just run through those by page. If you've got anything, just put your hand up. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, 5 and 6. So are we happy that I sign those as a true record of the meeting? Is that agreed? Agreed?
Sorry, Chair,
yeah. Oh, sorry, of course, electronic. We need to vote electronically. Okay, over to you, Robert.
Signed in because I haven't got one. I've got one person short on the voting system. It's Councillor Masson. I have got you logged in now, so that's fantastic. But Councillor, I'll just double check.
Councillor Warboys.
Yeah.
It's on the system.
Right. If I add you in, you should have been added in. Right. I'll sort that out very quickly now, Chair. So that Councillor Warboys is on there. And then we will be able to go to the electronic vote. Apologies for that, Councillor. Right, if you could try logging in again, Councillor, that should now, and then go to the attendance and voting, that should now show you, you should now be able to log in on there. I can't start a chair until we're all logged in, I'm afraid.
You can vote, but if you weren't at the meeting, you may choose not.
Brilliant, we're now all logged in. Apologies for that, Councillor Woolboys, Chair. So I'll now start the vote for the minutes of the last meeting. So if members could go to the plus sign in the top right-hand corner and go to the attendance and / voting tab, and the vote will show in subsection and will appear then in blue. The vote is now in progress.
Should I have had a proposer and a seconder? According to my notes.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, that's apologies on my part. So,
Can I just have a proposer? Thank you, and a seconder? Thank you.
right, we have just one vote remaining, Chair. Councillor Morley, do you want to cast your vote verbally? So you're not?
You can push the abstain.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. All votes have now been received, and that's 5 votes for, 0 against, and 3 abstentions. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, agenda item number 6 is to receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme. Have we received any?
None received, Chair.
Okay, so we'll move straight on to the schedule of planning applications. Excuse me. First item is agenda item 7A, DC 21 02564, land south of Old Stowmarket Road, Woolpit. I now invite the case officer Bradley Heffer to introduce the application to the committee. Bradley, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. This application, the first on the agenda today, is a reserve matters proposal, which is seeking approval for a car park to serve the health centre at Woolpit. This plan is a wider aerial view of the location. The actual area that you're seeing hatched there relates to the outline planning permission that was granted for residential development and the car park under the application in 2016. And for orientation, obviously there's the settlement of Woolpit here, Elmswell and Tostock. This is a larger scale plan, which again showing the overall plan for the outline, but it's important to note the constraints that are shown on there, which include the built up area boundary, which is shown brown, the conservation area for Woolpit, which is shown in the lilac colour, and the cluster of listed buildings which are towards the centre of the settlement, and a single listed building to the right hand side of the site as you look at it. This is the site itself for the car park, and this is useful in order to gauge its location in relation to existing residential development, which is in Saffron's Close, and there is the Woolpit Health Centre, which this car park would serve. That's a plan of the car park. As part of the outline planning permission I mentioned, there's a condition that says there's got to be 136 spaces in the car park. This accords with that requirement. As well as that overall number, it's proposed that there would be cycle parking located in this corner and also some spaces for powered two-wheelers, in other words, motorbikes, motorcycles. You can also just about see, hopefully, that area of parking along here, which is allocated for disabled users, disabled motorists. And the other thing to point out on here, although it's very faint, unfortunately, is the line, or sorry, is the illumination around the edge of the car park. Because obviously it's got to be illuminated, and there's a single column in the middle. This plan shows the soft landscaping proposals, and as you can see from that, it's not proposed to take out any of the trees or hedging along the boundary with the properties in Saffron Close, nor is it proposed to impact on the nice tree which is located away, what's outside the site, to the southeast. What you can see in effect is a softening of the boundary, so you've got a combination of planting, grassed areas and areas around here which is shown as hedging to soften the overall impact. Hard landscaping proposals, I've included this because this shows links through, because although this is this is linked in with the outline planning permission that was granted for the residential development you can see ghosted on the sides here, in anticipation of links through, particularly to development that's going to come on stream to the south, which I think came to committee recently for your consideration, you'll see that there's links through for cycles and pedestrians to access through there. The other thing that's useful to point out on this slide is that the main access to this car park is to take place from this point through the residential area. But as I've said in the report, the means of access won't be available in time because of the COVID issues. We're keen to get the car park provided ASAP, so therefore that requires an emergency form of access through from the Woolpit Health Centre. White line signing plan, basically that's been included so you can see that the general manoeuvre of vehicles around the site, and also you'll note that on the ground there's a 5 mile/h speed limit. This plan is useful because it shows, I mentioned the lighting earlier, this is the shared boundary edged red, lined red with the properties in Saffron Close. These lines here show the illumination that leads on from the lighting columns, which are shown as the red dots. And as you'll note, that lighting columns that are nearest the residential unit, residential development, for example, they will obviously face towards the car park, so the illumination is controlled at that point. So there's no backwash illumination, which is an important point. So therefore, while there will be, obviously there'll be, residents will note there's a car park there, the actual level of illumination has been controlled so that there wouldn't be an adverse impact. These are the barrier details it's proposed to install at the northern entrance and also at the temporary access that's being proposed. There, in effect, is a gate. I'm sure everyone's seen this sort of thing before in car parks. And in the case of the northern entrance, it's proposed there'd be a height restrictor as well. I'll finish with some views. As I've said in the report, the means of access through from Woolpit Health Centre means that some hedging had to be lost in order to effect that, and that had to be done prior, obviously, to the nesting season. So, as you can see, that's been carried out in anticipation of the work. You can also see in the distance there the construction of the houses on the adjacent site. So, therefore, the area we're looking at is the fenced area to the foreground. It's the flat grassed area. And that's the tree I was talking about, the nice tree that would be unimpacted by this proposal. And that's the area to the south which linked through to the car park, which, as I say, recently I think gained outline planning permission for residential development. I've included these drawings, these photographs, just to give you an idea of the stage of the work that's on the remainder of the site. This is taken behind the hedgerow, which faces onto Old Stowmarket Road, and you can see the developers are getting on with the residential development, and the properties you can just see in the distance there are the edges, the rears of properties in Saffron Close. Lastly, I'd like to draw your attention to the table papers, which hopefully you've had a chance to look at. As I've said in my report, because of the urgency behind the application and the need to get it basically up and running as quickly as we can, we had to get this to committee. It's an application made on behalf of the council, that's why it's come to you, but we had to get it quickly, and the publicity period hadn't expired when the application report was produced. So following on from the production of the report, on the table papers you can see that we've had comments now from Woolpit Parish Council. They've been put in verbatim, and we've also had a comment through from the Highway Authority. They haven't raised an issue with the proposal in terms of highway safety, because obviously the traffic generation arising from the car park would have been included as part of the overall residential development at the time of the outline. That would have been factored in. So there is no issue with that. I checked yesterday, and although the access wouldn't be available to the north for people to actually use the car park, it is intended to use the northern access or an access from the north for construction vehicles to actually construct the car park. So there wouldn't be a situation where construction vehicles are driving through Woolpit Health Centre car park, which obviously could create some sort of conflict. So I'll just say that. The other thing I would point out is that if you were minded to accept the recommendation, we think it's important to add a condition saying that the temporary means of access from the health centre is only an emergency access, and make that absolutely clear. So, you know, a condition would be imposed that makes it clear that you wouldn't be, would give granting permanent permission for that to be used as a vehicular access. The final comment on the table papers relates to ecology, and as you can see, they've got no objection. They've asked for the imposition of a construction environmental management plan, but that was imposed as part of the outline planning approval, so it's not necessary to reimpose the same condition on the reserved matters. The other thing that's not on there that we have received, we got that yesterday, was a response from our landscaping consultants, and they haven't raised any objections to the proposal. What they've asked for is adjustments in the mix of planting to better reflect what they feel is a more appropriate mix for that location. So again, we've got an outline, as part of the outline planning permission, we've got a condition which requires the submission of a landscaping scheme. So we feel that that can be dealt with in that particular way. I think that's picked up all the points I wanted to say now. The only thing I think is pertinent to point out now is that the advert period or the notification period on this doesn't expire to the 9th of June. So if you're minded to recommend accept the recommendation, we would still have until the 9th of June to see whether any material comments were made that would, you know, require that this to be brought back to planning committee anyway. So there's that issue as well. But that's all I need to say at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions at all? Yes, Councillor Caston first.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. In terms of drainage, I haven't quite got to grips with how the site's drained. I got slide 6 in our papers has got the filter drain on there, but I can't actually see it on the plan.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. The idea is that the channels between the spaces would be drainage rills, in other words. So you'd actually get drainage heading northwards, which is counterintuitive because you always imagine everything drops down. But in the way that the land works, it drops up. So the actual drainage would be the rills through here, linking through with the surface treatment generally, which would form towards that. And then you've got some collection points there and there, which lead to a storage attenuation crate system under the ground, and then following on from that, that then leads through to the drainage that's being laid to serve the residential. As I said in the report, it's only surface water provision anyway, clearly, because it is a car park, so there's no foul in this particular one.
So yeah, thank you for that. So there's a crate system in there. So well, yeah, it's all solved. In terms of the lighting, do we have any rules on conditions on when the lighting comes on, when the lighting goes off, and do we have any conditions on the type of lights that are used, energy-wise, or you know?
In terms of the types of lighting, there's a condition that was put on the outline which requires details to be approved of lighting. So we've got that control in place, and as I say, that's site-wide. That includes a residential, but it bites on the car park as well. So we've got that control. With regard to hours of operation of lighting, things like that, that's incorporated into the management plan, which I've touched on in the report. That isn't an issue to be considered at this stage because the management plan is yet another condition attached to the outline. So that would have to be agreed as a separate issue. But the operation and hours and things like that and those sorts of things will be incorporated within that plan.
Yes, you want to come in, Philip?
Chairman, if I can just add 2 points to that. Yes, the drainage system runs into the Barrett David Wilson Homes site adjacent and in turn runs northeast, and some of the delay associated with the delivery of this is to do with the provision of the pumping station that they have there, and there have been some material supply issues associated with it. So the provision of the site in practice relies upon that drainage facility being able to connect our system into it. So we are beholden to that and have designed this in conjunction with their engineers so that that works. Just to add to the lighting point, it's also true that we've been in discussion with Suffolk County Council around the potential for remote operation of the lighting at hours to be agreed, and this is still ongoing as part of a discussion with the assets team about a potential lease with the surgery. So there is active discussion around this. The lighting design has been done in discussion with County Highways colleagues, so it's standard operation there, and there is the potential for that to be operated at an agreed time to be run remotely by Suffolk County Council. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Next up is Councillor Matheson.
Thank you. Yeah, on the late papers, the Woolpit Parish Council seemed to raise some interesting points about the usage of the car park, and I've read the officer's comment on that, and I just wondered to what extent we need to express a view about that today ahead of the lease negotiations.
Chairman, if I come in on that, the opportunity you have here is to perhaps add an informative note which might cover the points that you would wish us to take away to the assets team regarding those negotiations. Clearly there has been some concern, I've seen that, and the applicant has confirmed that the management plan as proposed is actually informative and in draft terms, so it was meant to aid consideration of this. I think it's set a little bit of a hair running, and the reality is that there is a lease negotiation with the surgery about operation of the car park. There is a willingness for that car park to be available to the community, including the school, and that's as much as I know about those lease negotiations at this point.
Yeah, that's good. So we'll hear more about that after we listen to the other speakers then. Thank you.
Councillor Mansell, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of questions. The first one is about lighting. The diagram that you've got in your papers and was on the presentation on slide 9 doesn't cover the whole site. And I'm assuming that the purple bit is meant to be sort of unlit. And there appear to be some of the motorcycle spaces and the cycle area are shaded in purple, and they're below the bottom of your slide. I've had to look on the papers on the portal to see those, and I wondered why they were in the dark. Second question is about the gate. Can you please tell me how cyclists get past the gate should it be locked, because it's meant to be a cycle through route? Third question is the access from the existing Woolpit Health Centre car park, you said is an emergency access. Is that an emergency access forever? You know, as in when the new access is made available, will that still remain to be an emergency access? And is the fact that the construction traffic will be coming through the new development, is that conditioned, or are we just expecting it to happen that way anyway? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marcel. I'll go through those questions. If I could get the plan up again, if that's okay. Have you got... Oh, I can move this myself, sorry. I've lost it. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Councillor. Yes, to deal with your first question, the lighting plan, it doesn't show the whole car park. That's due to my technical inability, because the plan does show the whole car park and it's been cut off, unfortunately. I do regret that. And I think that if you look at the overall plan, it does show that that illumination area includes the piece in the bottom left-hand corner, so that the bikes would be covered by that.
Only 6 of the cycle hoops are in the white shading. The rest are all coloured purple on the one that's on the portal.
Right.
So some of presumably that purple is the dark, and most of the cycle racks are not covered in the white area on the plan.
I don't think you should read the purple area as being completely dark, because I think what's happened is that they've just drawn that area around the car park itself in order to show the level of illumination within the physical area of the car park. So I dare say that although the lights are pointing towards the car park or in towards the car park, the actual area behind those lights, it wouldn't be completely pitch black. It would be, you know, it's just that there's not a load of illumination coming down. But I take the point about the issue of the cycling, and I think that's a note that obviously we could take away if you wanted that to be addressed as part of a lighting design, which is covered by a condition on the outline anyway. So hopefully that could be resolved. With regard to the gate issue, that's the one. With regard to the gate issue, yeah, the gates here, there would be a pedestrian well, I think the outline planning permission requires that there is a cycle and pedestrian access provided in perpetuity anyway. It's the vehicular access which would be a temporary arrangement. So there is a permanent route through, and the gate would sit where you see my red dot. So it would sit on the carriageway, but this piece here would be unimpeded. So there would be access through at that point and that point. Similarly, the gates here would be across that point and that point. So that piece there, or that route through, would be unimpeded to pedestrians and cyclists. And there's no proposal to have a gate here or here. So hopefully that's addressed that one. The emergency access use, I mean, the access would exist and it would be gated, but I think the point of the condition would be that it would only be used for emergency purposes as and when required by the health centre, in all honesty. but it will be, apart from times when that is required, all access would take place through here. And I think that is established through the outline. So I think we're fairly comfortable with that. The construction traffic.
We're just going to come in, Bradley, on that point. Philip, you just want to come in?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so the access to the surgery has been an evolving idea over time, and at the outset we were keen to ensure that we could get vehicular access into the car park area so that people could both potentially receive vaccination and staff from the surgery could attend to any medical emergencies that might arise during that process. It was a concern from Barratt David Wilson Homes that there will be traffic going through their site, and at this point in time we have not received the transfer of that land from them, so that is under their control in terms of access availability. So the emergency access, as has been described this morning, the temporary access as it was originally conceived was to allow for access until such time as access to the north became available. Now obviously the world has moved on, things have changed, it still remains sensible to have that potential, and so from your point of view this morning we're recommending that we control it to emergency use, because the temporary activity, well, it depends entirely on when Barratt deliver their homes and are content that access can come through to the north. I wouldn't wish this committee to prevent that potential if that served the vaccination purpose that we need to achieve here. And so from our point of view, it's appropriate to control longer term access, and must bear in mind that the surgery is private land, and we wouldn't wish to see that become abused as an access point, and it therefore needs to be controlled so that it's used for prudent purposes and not as a general through route. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions from Councillor Mansell that haven't been answered? Yeah.
Was the construction management construction traffic route being conditioned, or are we just expecting it to happen? But could I come back on this cycle access through the gate? It's all very well saying there's a pavement, but there's only one drop curb on the northern bit of pavement, so you're expecting cyclists to hop up onto the pavement in front of pedestrians to get round a gate is not the most ideal situation. So that I just wanted to come back. It's all very well saying they're going by the pavement, but you haven't made it easy for them.
I understand the point you're making on that particular one, Councillor. I'm just mindful of the fact you haven't had a response on the thing about the construction traffic. In that particular case, I think that there's a construction environmental management plan, as you'd expect from the outline, but I don't see any issue with us actually making that clear in an informative that, that is as I understand it to be agreed, but just to reinforce that would be no issue to add that as an informative.
Councillor Ward, you were next.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the presentation. It's really a bit of a carry-on from which has been partially answered for me, I think, by the details about the emergency access or the temporary access. To me, it would have made sense for there to be a permanent vehicular access from the health centre car park. I should imagine if it's under its control, then it can be used as an overspill car park for vehicles turning into the health centre who would actually be able to carry on through into this car park and prevent vehicles being parked on the road leading up to the health centre. It's the business of it. I think it's been an emergency route. To me, it seems a sensible alternative route to the northern route through the residential area.
I understand the point you're making, Councillor Warboys. I think the access access as a through route through the existing car park to the surgery would not necessarily be ideal from a highway engineering point of view. So in terms of patients of the surgery, I suspect that in the long term, they will be directed to use this car park, and more vulnerable users and staff may well be directed to use the access onto the surgery's main current access. I would suggest that accessing traffic going two-way through the surgery car park, the geometry is quite challenging, I think, with a 90-degree bend, and it's not designed as a through route. So I think the prudence is not to encourage traffic to do that, though I understand what you're saying.
Thank you. No, thank you very much.
Councillor Field, you were next.
Thank you. Okay, we've covered cyclists. Just I noticed there's a need for disabled parking places. The parish council suggests they could be more in the health centre car park itself. But just interested is where is the access for people in wheelchairs or whatever between the health centre and this car park, and perhaps between the school and this car park. You know, I assume that they too have dropped curbs and a lack of gates and the various things we're talking about. Could you just make that clear?
Could you put the drawing up again? Sorry. Yes, thank you, Councillor. In terms of the car park through here, as I say, the vehicular access would be temporary. The pedestrian and cycling, where it's, I think the condition says pedestrian or pedestrian stroke cycling access. So there's some form of access will be through there, but the access would be on the pathways you can see through here. So you wouldn't actually be running through the carriageway. You'd be separate from the carriageway, and similarly there'd be access through there and through the top for pedestrians. Well, in terms of the access themselves, they would be pavement, I assume, that would be accessible to all users. I think that would be the idea. So I know that the hatching you can see here, for example, this would be tarmac, I assume. Well, I think it's hard leadscaping proposal. It doesn't actually say what the treatment of these is. I assume that would be blacktop, but this is level slabs. So these would be just demarcated in a different material.
I think Philip just wants to come in on this as well.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. So, as I understand it, the surfacing intention is conventional blacktop. That is intended to ensure this is delivered to a price that is appropriate, and clearly we have a funding point with this. The reason this application is before you today, ahead of the consultations closing, is that there is a SIL bid related to this, and time from our perspective as officers is of the essence. So the general surfacing is expected to be to blacktop, and I expect that to be level and available for people transiting between the surgery and the car park. That should enable that. If I just pick up on Councillor Mansell's point about cyclists having to bunny hop, as an aficionado of the activity myself, I think this is a reserved matters application, and it is perfectly possible for us to take that away and to redesign that detail, and for that to be something which could be the subject of a condition on this to ensure that is provided. That's perfectly within the scope of a decision on this reserved matters, if that's what members would like to see, and it certainly seems sensible, although I welcome some thoughts from Councillor Mansell about what she might wish to see as a way of dealing with that.
Thank you. Next, Councillor Muller.
Bradley, can you just confirm, please, that on the entrance exit, once the building work is finished on the actual site that's in progress at the moment, will that have a barrier with it, or will that be open all the time? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The permanent access, The plan that you've been looking at today does show gates and a height restrictor, but I think that the actual provision of those, judging from the comments we've received locally and parish council, that will be an issue to be looked at within the management plan, in all honesty. I think that if eventually that sort of feature does go in there, then that's part of that overall approval that you would be granting for the reserved matters.
Okay, we have no other questions, so we're going to move on. So we now move on to the parish council. Councillor Geek, you're going to speak as a parish councillor first. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm also a member of Woolpit Parish Council, as well as being a district councillor. The proposed car park for Woolpit Health Centre is generally supported by the Parish Council, but as you've noticed, there are some concerns in relation to its use. Now, there is, of course, an urgent need for more parking at the health centre, both for the current COVID vaccination programme and for the rise in patient numbers in the 23 parishes it serves. But it's also been agreed by all sides that it will be a public car park too. And this has been accepted both in the draft management plan and in all the meetings of the Parish Council so far, and it's hinted at in paragraph 10.2 of your committee report. We feel that this is the right thing to do, especially as public money is to be used to build it. Now, we do understand that future management is not part of the reserved matters, but the terms of that draft management plan have raised concerns, and we'd like to make you aware of our views at this stage. If there are specific opening hours, enforceable by gates, which can be decided by Mid-Suffolk District Council as the owner, but operated by another party via a lease agreement, the car park won't be available to the public out of those hours. And to give a kind of concrete example, the car park's within 400 metres of the village hall, and the village hall's adjoining car park, the current car park, is at the end of an no-through road, and it's frequently congested. We feel that surely the more hours that car park can be used, the new car park can be used, the more cars we can get out of our congested village centre, the better. In addition, we hope that the village primary school will use it for dropping off pupils in a much safer environment than the current lorry route of Heath Road. And we're concerned that the school has not yet been involved in design and access discussions. Similar questions arise about the lighting of the car park, both as to hours required, control of the circuit and the payment for electricity. Lighting a car park when it's not available for use isn't in anyone's interest. And then finally, we're pleased to see the provision of electric vehicle points for charging electric cars, but we note that there's no provision for the operation of such points. Their management is not yet covered within the draft management plan, and we feel that's an oversight. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, any questions for the ward member? No? Sorry, not the ward member, the parish councillor. My apologies, that's just a habit, isn't it? Okay, thank you very much. So we'll now move on, as we have no questions for the parish council. We don't have an objector, or a supporter, or the applicant. So I'll now ask the ward members to speak. First of all, go to Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. It's really good to see that this project is being brought forward early as a response to the COVID pandemic. Whilst it is not ideal for the access to this new car park to be from the Heath Road access through the health centre car park, this is the only solution available at present. It is essential for the temporary vehicle access to remain as a permanent access for pedestrians and cyclists, as this will form a useful route to promote active travel within the community. We must not forget that this new car park is not just for Woolpit residents. It will serve residents from 23 parishes within the catchment area for the health centre, a large proportion of those who are from Elmswell. In the long term, this car park will be accessed via Old Stowmarket Road, so those Elmswell residents will not have to travel through the congested centre of Woolpit to get to the health centre, which is a great advantage. There are the concerns within the community about the management plan for the car park, and we understand that these sit outside the planning process and are not material to any decision made today. But we hope that there will still be ongoing discussion to make sure that those conditions, the management plan, will be acceptable to the community and the parish council. I do have concerns about the gate of the vehicular entrances to the car park. From the plans, there is no way for cyclists to get past the gates other than bunny hopping onto the pavement. So that's not ideal. So I do hope that these can be addressed. Maybe these accesses should also be level slab, like the other pedestrian cycle access points. The temporary access via the existing health centre car park, I think, should be controlled by the health centre in the long term. If this car park is to be used as a drive-through vaccination centre, it would make much more sense if it was in one way and out the other way. But we would certainly not want it to be in general use as access from Heath Road. The existing car park will still, of course, be there, and maybe it might be suitable for a disabled parking area as it is much closer to the health centre building itself. I also have concerns about the lighting arrangements. As I said before, the plan printed on slide 9 only covers part of the area. It doesn't show the entrance nor the southern row of motorcycle spaces and cycle racks. It is useful for cyclists to be able to see when they unlock their bike, especially if, like me, they have a number thing and I can't see the numbers if it's dark. And whilst a balance needs to be made between the safety of people using the car park and harm to biodiversity and light pollution, surely in this day and age we should be using a smart lighting solution so the car park does not need to be lit at all times, only when it is necessary. I'm sure that is within the bounds of technology of today, that we can have a smart lighting solution. But on the whole, this is a great project and I am supportive of it, but it would be nice to get it perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the other ward member before we take questions for the ward members in case something comes out. So, Councillor Geek, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Unsurprisingly, I'd like to start off by saying I'd like to support the comments made by the Parish Council and by Councillor Mansell, and I'll just add a few of my own. I can only concur with Councillor Mansell's view that this car park is primarily to allow residents of other villages to drive to the health centre without inconvenience either to them or to Woolpit residents. Woolpit's main interest in this car park, as shown by the comments from the Parish Council, is in the other, perhaps secondary uses of the car park by Woolpit residents, as a school drop-off area, as an overflow car park for village hall events, as a visitors' car park for the surrounding estate, and so on. The village hopes that it will keep traffic away from the congested centre, and that is why the actual practical use is of more worry than the physical form. But there are still aspects of the physical form that affect the use. Councillor Mansell's talked about the gates. If those are to be installed, they shouldn't impede the use of the road as a cycle path. I would like to add also the height barrier. No consultation has taken place with the school, and we don't know whether access for hire vehicles, such as buses and minibuses, would be helpful to the school. But still, those are matters more for the lease agreement than for the committee today. And I'd just like to end by emphasising that the village, and indeed the whole ward and the wider area, is very much in favour of this car park and would love you to support it, but while leaving as many options open for the widest use of this publicly funded facility as possible. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Do we have any questions for the ward members? Yes, Councillor Matheson and Councillor Field.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, I'm very agreeing and hearing all the points about making sure it's a proper through route for cyclists and so on, and the uses. I wonder whether the discussions about the usage and the gates and one thing and another had taken into consideration the unfortunate possibility of the car park being used for nighttime boy racers and handbrake turns and like things, which unfortunately do plague other car parks.
What I think I'd like to do is apply the principle that if it's not yet broke, don't fix it. We've got several other car parks in Woolpit which are used by people who like to meet and chat often about small cars, and I live opposite one, only about 10 feet away. That people like to meet up and talk about cars, and it's not illegal. We don't have handbrake turns as yet, and I'm sure that if we did and we had noise and upset and misery, we would seek to solve that problem when it arose. So let's cross that bridge when we come to it, if possible, rather than kind of looking like we're expecting it to happen, which might encourage it. Oh, look, they think that's going to attract handbrake turns. I haven't done a handbrake turn for ages. That's my principle.
Thank you. Next question is Councillor Field.
Thank you. Very pleasing to hear a sensible attitude being taken. I think the question's possibly more for the officers than anyone else. It's a bit difficult to understand why we're in quite such a rush for this, because I can't see it getting built before we're out of the COVID vaccination period. But I think Mr Isbell did give another reason that sounded fairly genuine. The real question must be that the parish has made a lot of sensible comments, as have the ward members. How do we make sure that if we approve this today, that those comments really get carried forward and some sensible work is done to resolve things, you know, in accordance with the wishes of the local population, as well as getting the thing done in time to meet financial deadlines?
Yeah, that was the first thing on my list for when we go into debate. We've heard lots of proposals come forward. Lots seem to all make sense. It's just how do we tie it all up? But maybe Mr Isbell would like to pick up on the first point and come on to that now.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so in terms of the urgency question, I think discussions around December this year led to a desire generally on the part of the council to deliver this car park. Obviously, the planning permission existed. It would have been delivered at some point. The question was whether it could serve a purpose, and discussions have been going on by the Health Authority about the vaccination programme, which at that time were not fixed or necessarily known, but clearly there was a model which Woolpit Surgery had operating from the nearby industrial estate with a drive-through vaccination programme for flu. That was seen as a model that worked, and the opportunity to use this car park to support a vaccination programme was seen as being a good thing to address and prioritise. Since January, therefore, there's been a project group working on this to try and identify obstacles and identify solutions and work out how to achieve this. Now, the reality of the situation is that we are to some degree beholden to the build of the residential estate. I mentioned the drainage issue to Councillor Caston earlier, and that is a timing question which we have to respect because the site will positively drain in that direction. The access too is also an issue because at this point in time the District Council does not own the land. There is a Section 106 under the outline which transfers it to the District Council upon occupation of dwellings, but they have not yet happened. However, in fairness to Barratt David Wilson Homes, they have been more than willing to work constructively with us to explore the opportunities to provide that. They too have been hostage to what we can all see in the real world around materials supplies, and those are a real challenge for us in trying to deliver a car park here. So all of those things have been ticking away as issues we have been exploring whilst the vaccination programme has been rolled out nationally. So we have expedited and accelerated the time frame for delivery of this car park, but it was always intended to be provided at some point in time. At the moment, the conversation is evolving into a conversation around delivering the booster programme, because that is seen as being necessary through the end of the year into next year. And I think my own sense of any virus is that it will mutate, and the science is the science. So there is likely to be a continued need for this. The question then of enabling this site to operate is partly health efficiency, because for some of the vaccination programmes, having health staff on site has been a desirable thing in order to deal with anaphylactic shock and the like. And when you're operating remotely from the business park, clearly you have to take site staff away from the surgery when they could be doing other things at the surgery and be a short walk from this site rather than having to be kept available at another location. So we think there is quite a degree of common sense around that. Those are just some of the issues that sit behind the timetabling of this. We are hostage to quite a few things, but I think it's fair to say almost all of the parties, Barratt David Wilson, the County Council and others, have worked constructively to try and bring this forward in a timely way. It was always granted planning permission before the pandemic existed, and it was always seen as supporting a need which was desirable to support the surgery. I think what's happened is that has brought it into sharp focus, and we have an opportunity. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions for the ward members? Yeah, Councillor Caston.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just wondered how far, roughly, probably this is one for Councillor Geek, how far roughly the primary school was from this car park and whether it's a credible alternative to parking outside the school.
That is an interesting question because the access and the path don't currently exist. So it's not a route I've ever walked. I can only suggest that we see if we can find something on the, here we go, on the slide 4 is an excellent one. So if you can see, because we've got no scale, but the 400 from the car park site to the edge of the map is probably about 200 metres. So I would guess it's at the very most 200 metres. What people who are more used to looking at plans, what do you think?
Let's get a contrary opinion from Councillor Mansell, or a matching opinion. What's it going to be?
Well, I'm just looking at the Google Earth picture, and I'd say, yeah, from the health centre, if you look at the line of the hedge line on a Google Earth picture, which I think you've got on your slideshow, haven't you, Bradley? There's a sort of straight hedge line, which I'd say, looking at the scale on my screen, is about 200 metres from the corner of the health centre to the existing Woolpit Primary School. And of course, last month we granted permission for that school extension, which is out the back there. So I'd say, yeah, it's about 200 metres from the edge of the car park.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, any other questions for the ward members? No. Okay, so we've heard from everyone that's going to speak today, and we've obviously had all the papers put before us. So it's over to us to discuss, debate, and come to a conclusion. Can I just ask, go straight in and just ask, we've heard questions, I've made a list here, we've heard questions around lighting, access, alternative use, cycling, parking in terms of lighting and access for cycling, pedestrian access, construction traffic, and we've said a lot of these we can either do informative notes or pick them up later. How can we wrap all those points up so that, and the lighting in terms of times of lighting and how the lighting would operate, how can we wrap all those up? Because they are all items that actually we should be able to deliver, but it's just about how do we get it into the recommendation and make sure that does happen.
Chairman, I suppose what I would suggest is that certainly if you are minded to follow the concerns of the parish council, I would suggest you would add an informative which would say that the committee would wish those concerns to be addressed as a practical matter in giving effect to this decision, and that's one option. So that simply wraps together quite a number of issues which do not have a specific issue, but effectively would hopefully, and I will take that away, but that's certainly one informative. I'm going to struggle a little on the construction management side and turn back to Bradley in relation to that, but as regards cycling and bunny hopping with the gate, it might be sensible, as I suggested, for officers to include a condition which says something to the effect of, notwithstanding any detail shown on the drawing regarding the gate to the northern entrance to the site, provision shall be made for cycle access when the gates are closed. And we can certainly take that away, but I think that's a question of whether that's what Councillor Mansell is particularly focused on around that point, and whether that would work for her.
So can we, in the informative, actually ask that the officers liaise with the parish council and the primary school just to look at what is the best solution for that car park outside of the operating hours of the surgery?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I've got Councillor Muller first, then Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm more than happy with this particular application, and I will be more than happy to recommend approval of this application, subject to what Mr. Isbell has just sort of informed this committee. That's basically it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Matheson.
Yes. On the wording that, getting echoing noises, oh, it might be this. Yeah. The words that Mr. Isbell suggested about the cycling, the ones that I wrote down earlier as a condition was really that there should be a through route for cyclists 24/7 with level access, including when the gate is shut, if the gate appears. Because I think there was a definite intention that this would add to the cycle infrastructure of Woolpit. And while I'm speaking, I think the point about the 23 villages, people coming in to use the health centre, I think probably not quite so many, but the same thing applies in relation to the school, of course, that people will be coming in for a number of other villages, bringing children in to the primary school. So I think that just emphasises the point about the liaison, including the school. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to run through this just so that we're absolutely clear. So it's been proposed by and others can come in. It's been proposed by Councillor Muller, seconded by Councillor Matheson. But following the recommendations on page 25 of our papers, but with an informative note that discussions take place between the Parish Council, the school, the surgery and Mid-Suffolk District Council around the availability of the car park outside of the surgery hours, that access is looked at in terms of cycling with a level access, with lighting to be determined, but smart lighting to be determined, I think we should call it. Construction traffic's already been taken care of, I think. We already have that as a standard standard condition. And then in terms of the temporary access and it becoming a permanent access and how those gates are going to work. So those are the key things that I've got that are listed on my list. Is there anything I've missed out? Councillor Warboys.
No, Chairman, thank you. I think that's an excellent list. Just a couple of suggestions, really, that perhaps the feasibility of bollards would be better than a gate, because that would leave the access open for pedestrians, cyclists and wheelchairs, but prevent motor vehicles travelling backwards and forwards. I do think the community aspect of this is really very important, and support what the ward members have said. My other suggestion is perhaps we looked at where the EV charging points are, to look at whether these could be the EV solar port charging bays similar to the ones we've deployed in Stowmarket, that might require different wiring to just put in a straightforward EV charging point, whether that's provisions made for it, which would offset the costs of running the EV charging points.
Okay, so we just asked that the EV charging points are looked at to try and find the most economical system. And the bollards, yeah, that's a great idea. I suspect I'm going to be told that those bollards are hugely expensive compared to a gate, but I think that absolutely answers the problem of cyclists and pushchairs getting through very simply. So we'll leave that with. Yeah, please do.
Sorry, Chairman. I mean, perhaps if members want to carry on and I come in at the end, that might be most useful, because there are some things that can come back.
Yeah, sure. Councillor Field, do you want to come in?
I agree with most of what's been said so far. I'm inclined to say, well, let's stop debating and get on with it. Time is of the essence, and let's get moving. I'll just add something on bollards. They're an excellent solution, but in my past experience is horrendously unreliable. So if you want an access which is available a few days a week when the bollards are working, that's the right way to go. If you'd like one that's working all the time, a gate is more primitive but reliable. Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else wish to speak before we go back to Philip? Yeah, Councillor Caston, now bring Matheson back.
Just a couple of points. I don't want to be too negative because I will be voting for this unless something else comes up in debate. But I do feel a little bit uncomfortable with doing this before the consultation period ends. I can understand why we're doing it. I'd like to know that if something did come up, it would definitely come back to committee, because it's not really how things are supposed to work. The lighting plans, I'm not particularly happy with. I don't think they really give me what I need from those with those purple areas which make it look like there's no light. It doesn't really cover the waste light, which I think is a really important issue for the houses surrounding this. I'd like to see the lighting, the diagram, go out further than the car park to see what pollution there is. But this is much needed provision. It's if I don't think there's a primary school in the whole of Mid Suffolk that wouldn't welcome anything that helps them for dropping off children and blocking up the roads. There's so many problems. So I would really welcome that to be spoken to in this process. Cyclists becoming pedestrians for 10 seconds doesn't really concern me too much. I can understand why we want the smooth flow of cyclists into there. But as a cyclist, it doesn't worry me that at the end of my journey, I'd have to get off my bike, lift it onto a pavement and become a pedestrian over the pavement. But I will say anything that lets cycles in will let motorbikes in, which could potentially be an issue in a residential area. But I'm, in favour of this. It's good. I agree with what all the other councillors have said, and I'm ready for the vote.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Matheson, after you, we will go to the vote.
Yes, if Councillor Muller's agreeable, I was hoping we could just put the magic words "at all times" into the part about cycling and level access. I think that's a usual phrasing.
Yeah, can I suggest we hear from Mr Isbell all the points that have been raised and just see what the wording is, then we can ask you two to comment. Mr Isbell, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a reserved matters application that you're looking at. The use of this was looked at with the outline. There is nothing on here which debars it. I don't think you can impose a condition to prescribe that now, but you can add an informative to expect that to be made available. And clearly the surgery have a right to say no if they don't wish to allow access through their car park. That is their prerogative, or to control how it is. So I don't think you can dedicate this to public access in quite that way, and I would be wary of doing that, but I think it's perfectly reasonable for committee to approach this as adding an informative, as you'd suggested, Chairman. In terms of wording, I'd suggest that informative says that the committee requests officers to work with the parish council, surgery and school to resolve appropriate availability and management of the car park and its lighting and use in delivering the facility. That would seem to me to give everybody the ability to negotiate this in a practical sense, which I think is what's required, because ultimately there has to be a lease for the car park in order to deliver it, as we're anticipating. So that's my suggestion for an informative, Chairman. In terms of the point about the gate and the bollard, I still think that we have a gate before you. You don't have a bollard before you. Decide the application in front of you would be my advice. And I would say, as far as cycling goes, you are perfectly at liberty to add a condition, and we'd recommend it to say, notwithstanding any detail within this application, the detail for the gate area to the northern access shall enable safe and level access by bicycle when the gate is closed, in a manner which shall have been agreed by the local planning authority before the use commences. Then on the question of the surgery and the emergency access, can I suggest, as we're in an uncertainty around the availability of the northern access because of the delivery of the Barrett David Wilson site, what I'd suggest is a condition that allows for access to the surgery for emergency or temporary purposes, which shall have been agreed in writing by the local planning authority in advance, so that we have both the potential for temporary access and the potential for emergency access, but not permanent access through that car park. I'm not sure how close I've got to what members wanted.
Thank you. So in effect, we've got one informative and two conditions.
Correct.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Miller?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I am happy with that.
And
Thank
Councillor Matheson, you happy with that? Yeah. Okay. On that basis, I think we'll go to a vote, as I have no other hands up. So it's been proposed by Councillor Muller, seconded by Councillor Matheson, as per the recommendations, on page 25, with the additional informative that we've just had read out, along with the conditions on the cycling and the access. On that basis, I think we'll go to a vote, and we'll ask the Governance Officer to take the vote, please.
Thank you, Chair. So what I've put in modern.gov is that application DC 21-02564 be approved as detailed in the updated officer recommendation, with the additional conditions and informatives as read out by the Chief Planning Officer. Is that acceptable, Chair? Thank you. So if members could please go to the modern.gov app and go to the plus sign in the top right-hand corner of today's agenda. This will bring up the subsection on voting/attendance, and there you will see the vote in progress coloured in a light blue colour. Thank you, Chair. All votes have now been received, and that is 7 votes for and unanimous.
Lovely, thanks very much. Okay, so normally we try and take a break every 90 minutes. I realise, every hour and a half. I realise we've only been going for an hour and 10 minutes, but I suspect rather than breaking up the next application, if we take a quick 10-minute break now, start again at 10 to 11, please, with the next application. Just please remember to socially distance as we leave this chamber or use the facilities. Thank you. Right, welcome back everyone. Okay, we're now going to look at agenda item 7B, DC 21 00366, and we'll hand over to the case officer, Daniel Cameron. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is application DC 21 00366. It's for land to the south of Westhorpe Road in Finningham, and it's an application made in outline with all matters reserved for the erection of up to 8 dwellings with garages. So here we have the site plan here. You can see the linear run of development to the north side of Westhorpe Road, immediately opposite the site, and we have residential development immediately adjacent, and we have a expanse of field immediately adjacent, and I'll come to that in a moment because the aerial maps provided here are slightly out of date with what's actually on site. Here we take the wider view. We can see the field pattern extending away to the west of the site, off towards Westhorpe, and we can see the rest of the settlement pattern of the village of Finningham as well to the east. I'll come now to a more recent aerial view, and you'll see that there is work going on the site immediately adjacent to the application site. The application site is here. In 2018, outline planning permission was given for this site, and that received reserved matters approval in 2019, and development is currently underway for the erection of 6 units on this site here. And you'll see in the images later, members, that development is well advanced, and you'll also get a clear idea of the appearance of that development as well. If we look at the site location plan, again, we can see that laid out. Here we have 3 plots and then 3 plots. And if I come now to the constraints map, members, I'll talk you through these. So we have the brown line here that denotes the existing settlement boundary of Finningham. You can see that it does not include the adjacent site to this one or the site that we're looking at here. We have a public right-of-way that crosses down the boundary of the site, and I'll show you some images of that later as well, members. And then we've got the 2 orange buildings as well, particularly notable. This is Hill House. It's a Grade 2 listed building, immediately adjacent to the site on the other side of the road. And then we have this one here, which is a White Horse Public House. I'll come now to the joint local plan. You can see the purple line here extends the settlement boundary much as it is. It doesn't extend around the adjacent site, and obviously doesn't include this site here, and I'll come to that issue in a moment as well. We've also got 2 allocations for housing development within the village. We've got one to the eastern side and one to the north. I'll quickly run you through the site plans. Obviously, as an outline application, we have the red line site plan, and we've also been provided with a site plan. It's a little difficult to see here, members, so apologies. It might be clearer in your bundle. There's a grey line that runs along the frontage of the site, and that's the point at which the developer has agreed that within any reserved matters that might come forward, nothing greater than a single story in height would be placed on that portion of the site. So I think if we turn now to a few of the issues that are raised just in terms of the call-in on the site, we obviously have 3 quite clear issues in terms of the sites outside the settlement boundary for the village, both in the adopted development plan and in the emergent joint local plan. It wasn't brought forward in the call for sites to support the emergence of the joint local plan, and also the limited nature of the services and facilities in Finningham village itself. Those issues are dealt with in greater detail in sections 3 and 4 of your report, members. However, I just wanted to bring a few points to your attention in that obviously we have the adjacent sites, obviously granted 2018 and then reserved matters in 2019. I think, members, we might be on a slightly difficult road if we were to say, looking at the planning history for the area, if the adjacent site has been found to represent sustainable development, why would the adjacent site not be? And I think as well we need to turn some attention to the joint local plan in that if we have allocated housing development within the village of Finningham, are we also saying that there is sufficient access to services and facilities for those two allocations? To look slightly at the call for sites issue, and I'll quickly scroll back just to get an overhead in case it's clearer. We actually have a made footway that runs, and you'll see this in the site images as well, members, that runs along the north side of Westhorpe Road and provides a connection down to the public house. And we've also got sort of a small holding shop for selling produce there. And obviously we've got the main bus stops within Finningham there as well, although the frequency of the services are obviously limited. If I come on to the images of the site, because I think they'll probably help you understand some of the other issues with the development slightly more. Here we have a view along Westhorpe Road looking into Finningham. The house on the left-hand side of the image, that is Hill House, that's a Grade 2 listed building. And in the distance, members, you can see the 6 units currently being developed on the adjacent site. I think this image and the next image also gives you a good indication of the topography of the site. We've got a slight incline from the highway to the field, and you can see that that increases as you move along the road into the village. You can see that slightly better here, and this will come on to another issue here as well. As you move round this bend, we obviously move down, and then we have another bend, and then you start to move up as well. You can see a little bit of parking on the road associated with the development of the adjacent site. In the conditions, members, you'll note that there's a condition requiring a construction management plan, such that if we were to approve the application before us today, we would have detail of on-site parking provided in advance of any development commencing on site, such that we could look to avoid issues such as on-site parking of contractors' vehicles. I've shown you this image, members. This is taken from Google Street View, and it's dated 2011. So it's the view along Westhorpe Road towards Westhorpe. We can see Hill House quite prominent on that corner there, and we can see actually the field as it would have been prior to the granting of outline and reserved matters on the adjacent site. And I think actually if we look at it from the other view as well, we can see there's been a stark change to that landscape through the granting of planning permission on that adjacent site. I'll push slightly further on. Here's a view from Hill House across the site. You can see the back corner of the adjacent development on the left-hand side of the screen. And then this is the run of the public footpath. It's very much a path that just runs along a field, quite typical. There's no sort of additionality to it. It is looking to provide that crossing and connection into the wider public rights-of-way network. I think at this point, this is an image taken closer to that bend, and you can see the cars and vans of contractors parked there, but also this sort of a darker area just behind. That's an element of standing water on the highway. This is a known issue with this bend. In effect, road drainage for this point of the highway's network feeds into a gully and then into a manhole. The manhole is about 1 metre deep and 1 metre in diameter, and it's likely not sufficient for the amount of water that it needs to cope with, hence the standing water in the road. If we come on, here are some images provided by neighbours to the adjacent development. Obviously, this is a quite peak time in terms of water, but I think it gives members some idea as to the potential for standing water in the highway. Now, in terms of that issue, it's obviously one for the Highway Authority to address. It's their drainage, it's within the highway. It's not possible for the developer of the site to come forward and effect that without permission from the Highway Authority. I'm also given to understand that the developer has been in contact with the neighbours opposite the access to the site and where the issue is. They proposed a method of dealing with some of that standing water, in that they propose a below ground soak away under the neighbouring property's land. That would feed into the existing manhole for storage of water and dispersal of water. So it would provide a secondary storage area for water on the other side of the road. We'll probably provide some protection for those properties because obviously, as we can see in extreme events, the water crosses the road and starts to come up the curbing. But obviously, members, we've got that issue where the topography of the road slopes down towards that bend and also away from it as well. So we have water coming into that from two areas. I think the other issue we just need to look at and address, and forgive me for backtracking slightly, is the impact of the development on Hill House. So we have a Grade 2 listed building adjacent to the development site. Now, we have a clear idea of sort of the appearance of the dwellings that the developer has brought forward on the neighbouring site, and I don't think there's anything that would suggest to me that a different design approach will be taken here, although obviously that's something that we'd need to look at in any subsequent application for reserved matters. But in terms of its response to the area, it responds fairly well. They're fairly attractive, they're nicely appointed and designed, they're slightly more modern in appearance, in terms of internal ceiling heights and things, so they have a slightly higher ridge height than the more traditional dwellings on the northern side of the road, but I don't think they're unattractive, I don't think they're unpleasant. We have the comments from the Council's heritage team, and they obviously note a medium level of less than substantial harm. What they do note is that there is potential within the reserve matters for that level of harm to be reduced. They indicate both the addition of a green buffer to the site frontage and also use of design and heights within the site to further reduce that level of harm. Now, obviously, members will be aware that the MPPF, when we have a less than substantial level of harm identified, there needs to be a balancing exercise undertaken in accordance with paragraph 196, and I'm sure that will be gone through as you enter into your debates. I'll leave matters there, and I'll leave the images up for members so we can go back through if there's anything that they would like identified in questions or might be helpful to them in asking their questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If I can kick off with some questions, if I may. So I know we're not here to talk about the application next door, but can you just tell us how many houses was built there? And with this new site, which is obviously running next to it, is it the same landowner or a different landowner? Because there's no affordable housing if you amalgamate the two sites together. Is the first question. There's no landscape plan or anything like that in our papers. Is that because it's an outline? But could you just explain why there isn't one? Yeah, those are the 2 points.
Thank you, Chair. If we could go back to the...
Can I just ask the third question?
Of course, yes.
The third question is, you said we would have there'd be a construction management plan. Is there a construction management plan next door? Because obviously what we're seeing there is people parking and trashing the side of the road. So what's happened to the construction management plan in that location?
So, so land ownership. So in terms of land ownership, let's just make sure we flick through the right way. So in terms of land ownership, we've had information submitted with the application. So this site came forward for development in 2018 and was in separate ownership to the rest of the site. This has remained in that separate ownership. We have 6 plots shown on the plans, and from the photos, that's what we've got built out. We have the 3 on that side that are very visible in photos, and then there are also 3 on the other side. So we've got 6 units on that site, and obviously we've got some landscaping around to the edges. Now, members will be aware of their policies with regards to affordable housing. Where we have artificial subdivision of a site in order to avoid delivery of affordable housing, policies are very clear that we would look to reimpose the full amount of affordable housing on the site when the subsequent application came forward. In this instance, at no point have these 2 sites ever been in the same ownership, so there's been no artificial subdivision in that regard. I think probably it's likely that should this site come forward, an option will then be exercised and the developer will take it on and then bring forward the development. But in terms of artificially subdividing it in order to avoid affordable housing, that's never been the intention. This site came forward as 6, and this site is potential for up to 8. If we look at landscaping, yes, you're exactly right, Chair. We've got a Reserve Matters application before us, so everything we'd have at Reserve Matters would be appearance, scale, layout, access to the highway, and also landscaping. So at that point, we'd be able to look at particularly, I think, what happens along the site frontage, given the comments of heritage, but also what happens at this edge, and how what happens at this edge creates a more defined edge for the development and for the village, because obviously we then move into the countryside as we move along Westhorpe Road, and also what that landscape does in terms of the run of the footpath, in terms of how that responds there, and we can obviously undertake the relevant consultations with the relevant public rights of way team, with heritage again on submission of Reserve Matters, and obviously members, if during your deliberations it's a case of you are content with the principle of development, but are concerned about the Reserve Matters, well, there is always the option that you could make your determination to be that the Reserve Matters would return to committee for approval rather than rest with officers, or if you weren't sure that that needed to be done at that point, there is always the option of bringing the item back to committee through the call-in procedure. Last point in terms of the construction management plan, I'm not aware of a construction management plan condition on the neighbouring site, but on this site, given the issues around the access, you'll see in the last section of your report, members, we do have that added in here, and I think that covers off a number of different elements as well. So we're looking to make sure we understand how contractor parking would operate, how what provision there would be to stop water from the site entering the highway during construction, hours of work, hours of deliveries, all those sorts of things, so that we can understand and control that element of development, because I think from the comments that have been received during the application, one of the large sort of local notes has been in terms of the parking on that highway verge, and also on the standing water around the access. So I don't think we'd want to be in a position where, if we were approving the principle, we'd be looking to repeat the experience on this bend, especially given as it runs down into the village.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Mansell, you wanted to come in with a question?
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions. First question is about the highways response, which we've got on page 69 of our papers. It refers to visibility displays on a drawing, which I don't know if we've got access to. And as I understand it, this application doesn't include the access, so how can there be a drawing of a visibility display? Second question is relating to the footpath. On the image you've got on slide 5, it looks as if the red line area goes to the west of the footpath, but the picture on slides 7 and 9 looks like the footpath is the western boundary of the site. So could you please clarify where exactly this footpath goes with relation to the site? And the third question is, on the recent aerial photograph, it looked like there was some sort of works to the south of the existing development. Can you tell me if there's any planning application for any further development down there? Because it looks like it's already got some earthworks. Thank you.
Apologies, members. I'll get used to how things work now. We're back in person at some point, I feel sure. In terms of the visibility displays, access is a Reserve Matter. So while highways might want to see a plan there and certain displays provided, because it's a Reserve Matter, that the point of access within the site is subject to change. So I think at this point, and I mention it in the report in section 5, although highways have come back in their response and noted a number of conditions, I don't think it's quite appropriate that we want to require those to be provided at this point, given that the applicant has clearly said that access is a Reserve Matter and may be subject to change within the site. So I think from their point of view, we don't need to secure that at this point, but obviously on submission of reserved matters, that would be the appropriate point that we would be going back, checking that we have the appropriate visibility space to meet the requirements of highways and make sure the access is in a sensible location such that those visibility displays aren't affected by the topography of the road immediately in front of the site for you there, members. And yeah, I agree, the earlier points in terms of the aerial mapping that's been undertaken, showing the site boundary, I think this is more a case of our mapping where we've then interpreted where the red line of the site runs is slightly out compared to the red line that's been submitted. And in terms of which of the two I would use, I would utilise the red line that's been submitted by the applicants, such that, if I get to it, there we go, the footpath, yeah, it forms that boundary. I mean, presumably the footpath could form part of the site if the landowner was so willing and the developer wanted to take it on, but in terms of additional considerations for them, there's then all the legal requirements that exist around footpaths in terms of their temporary stopping up or diversion during construction works. So I think, based on the fact that the red line sets it as its western boundary, that is what I interpret to be the correct western boundary for it, so that the footpath runs outside of it. And then if we jump slightly back to the more recent aerial, I'm not aware of any planning application on this site, and I think it might just be a case of when the aerial was taken, some works were going on within the site or crop had been removed, but I'm not aware of a planning application on this site, and certainly from the joint local plan, we don't have the extension of the settlement boundary around anything there, and we don't have an allocation made on that site as well. So I'm not aware of anything planned to come forward on that site either.
You want to come back?
Yeah, could I come back on the highways comment, because the letter from the highways officer says before the access is first used, visibility displays as indicated on drawing number 5618/05A. Well, where is drawing 5618/05A? It doesn't appear I can't find it on the planning portal. Does it exist? Has it been drawn? And if so, why don't we have access to that drawing to see the sort of indicative visibility displays from this site, even if it's not an actual access as per the planning permission?
So in terms of the reserve matters, sorry, I'm getting confused about what mouse I actually need to use. Again, I'll get used to this. In terms of the application, access is reserved. So anything that shows as a potential access and shows as potential visibility displays has the capacity to be changed. The only requirement for the application at this point is to show that an access could be made, and that's what the Highway Authority are responding to in that instance. I'm just going to try and check the planning file for you, members, to make sure, because the drawing numbers have gone from my mind as well.
May I come in? Dan, was it 16A? Sorry.
161805A.
Okay, so that's the location plan.
Yes, can we go back to the PowerPoint, please?
So on that plan, is that okay? Can you hear? So I think we've had that plan, haven't we, on screen? That's the one which is the red line plan, or have we got the other one on there? So if I zoom into that on my version, the
is that
indicative point is in the middle, but it's not very clear. But that's the only plan we have as an indicative plan, is that not correct? Yeah. So that is the plan we're working to, that is the red line plan, and that is what is before us. We appreciate that often with outlines access comes along naturally. In this case, it hasn't. It is all reserved matters. We are just dealing with a red line around a plan. And ultimately, all the conditions that are recommended by Highways, they haven't sought to resist this development in principle in terms of traffic generation or any particular access issues, they have sort of conditions, but irrelevant of that, they would have to be on the reserved matters application where access is reserved for. So ultimately, in the principal sense that we're dealing with this application at outline, we have no objection from the Highways Authority, and that's the position we are within.
Thank you. Councillor Matheson, you were next.
Thank you. Yeah, paragraph 4.3 refers to bus services and stops, and clearly the sustainability of this location is going to be important. Can we not have from somebody a greater degree of detail about what the frequency of services is? Because I think too often we get kind of vague statements about bus services in the village, and when you get down to it, especially in my villages, it turns out it's like 2 a week, or if you're lucky. And I think either from the ward member or somebody, please.
But there's also a link, I think, on your point about because planning permission has been given in the next door site. So does that mean it is deemed to be a sustainable location or not? If you could just answer that as well.
Of course. So in terms of bus services, they're all accessed from stops at the White Horse Public House. There's route 320 and 387. They aren't the most frequent. 387 provides a connection towards Gislingham on a Thursday. Monday to Friday, the 387 will operate in the morning, but then additional services are Thursdays and Wednesdays. And the 320 operates Monday to Friday, but is a midday service to So it's not incredibly frequent. It's not served. But in terms of where we are in terms of the planning history, the council as a local planning authority has previously considered development on the immediately adjacent plot of land. Obviously 2018, the planning landscape was slightly different for the council at that point in terms of 5-year housing land supply, being able to demonstrate the necessary 5-year housing land supply. But obviously we've still assessed it, and in terms of the MPPF, the site has been found to be one that represents sustainable development. And I think there is an issue in that, yes, we are 2021 now, we have the 5-year housing land supply, we have the emergent joint local plan coming to examination at the back end of this month. But ultimately, section 3 of the report runs through this. The adopted development plan is not of sufficient age that can be considered to be in full compliance with the MPPF. And accordingly, where we have our CS plans, our CSO1, CSO2 policies, they're not considered to carry sufficient weight in order to be determinative in their own right at this time. We have the emergent joint local plan coming forward, and it doesn't allocate this site, but we do have other allocations within the village. So presumably for those allocations, we've determined that their connection to services and facilities, including access to public transport, is sufficient to allow them to come forward. And we are unfortunately in the position that while the emergent joint local plan has been closer than it's ever been to being adopted, it still is not adopted, and the degree of weight that it attracts is limited. We also aren't in a position where we have a neighbourhood plan that's coming forward within the village, so we don't have those additional policies to look at or attribute weight to. So I think section 3 covers that fairly in depth for you members, but I think in terms of the planning history of the site, in terms of the position of the village within the joint local plan, and I think in terms of the material weight we're able to afford the adopted development plan that we currently have and the emergent joint local plan, we're in a position where unfortunately we're reliant on the MPPF. And if we found the neighbouring site to be sustainable, I think were we to refuse the application on those grounds, I think a planning inspector would quite rightly ask us to clearly demonstrate why the adjacent site was acceptable to form sustainable development, but this site, which is not any different in terms of its connection to the rest of Finningham, aside from being slightly further away, why we would come to a different conclusion given the facts before us in this application.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm now going to move on to bring forward. We have two parish councils that have been invited to speak today because the parish boundary is very close between Finningham and Westhorpe. So I'd now like to ask Tony Kilby, Finningham Parish Council, to speak. Yes.
Can I have an opportunity to questions?
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
Sorry, I just had a couple of questions. Sorry to jump in. Yeah, on page 53 of the report, paragraph 3.16, the report says that this site would have a strong functional relationship to the village. Given that elsewhere in the report it's acknowledged that Finningham doesn't have many services, what does this statement mean? I.e., what's the functional relationship to? And then again, I suppose I want to unpick this principle of development that Janice just referred to. 13.4 refers to the adjacent site, and you're, I think, trying to piggyback on that, the fact that the principle of development is already there. But to my mind, there's a very different situation now because we have a 5-year land supply. Can we just sort of explain that a bit better? Thank you.
So 316 in the report, we're not looking at a site that is particularly remote from the rest of the village. It's not poorly spatially related to the rest of the village. Could we have the PowerPoint back, please, Mandy? If I get my directions right. Here we go. I think this is useful. You know, we have this neighbouring block of development. Here we have something that would visually tie into that run of development to the south. We have the connection along Westhorpe Road into the crossroads. That obviously provides a pedestrian route to the bus stops, the public house, and the small holding shop, such as we have it. So we're not looking at something that is physically remote from the rest of the village. We're not looking for something that is oddly spatially related to the rest of the village. We obviously have the other sites here, have a good link into the crossroads here, and then obviously this one slightly further away, put links in as well. So we have a number of developments within Finningham coming forward that would be utilising those services and facilities. In terms of 314, you're absolutely right. We do have the 5-year housing land supply now. That's dealt with, hopefully, in the report. But in terms of where that leaves us, members, previously we didn't have the 5-year housing land supply, so the presumption in favour of sustainable development was automatically engaged in the determination of applications. Now we have the 5-year housing land supply, so there's not an automatic engagement. However, we still have to deal with the issue that the adopted development plan is not of an age where it can be completely reflective of the MPPF. I mean, if we look at the core strategy, that's 2008 and before the publication of the first MPPF. When we look further back at the local plan, that's 1998, and again, came forward at a time well before the MPPF was ever a white paper or a green paper that we might then have to look at in the future. So when we're looking at the wording of those policies, they aren't in strict compliance with what we're required to look at with regards to the MPPF. And the issue we then come up to, members, is that paragraph 213 of the MPPF requires that where policies are not in full compliance with what's required of them by the MPPF, they carry a lesser degree of material weight in the determination of applications. And that's the reason why, in this instance, we're looking at the the fact that we have a sustainable development going on adjacent to the site, that in terms of the principle, I don't think there are the policy. I don't think there is the policy support there for you members to say that the policies that we would normally apply, CS1, CS2, HO7, have the material weight in and of themselves to be able to determine the application on their own merit. So that's why we've accepted, or the report indicates that the principle of development is acceptable for members, and why the recommendation is given as it is. Obviously, members might want to explore those points more in debate, but in terms of where the council's policies currently are, we are in that sort of sticky position between we have policies looking to come in that are fully in accordance with the NPPF, but unfortunately are afforded limited weight, and we have policies that are still afforded a degree of weight, but not sufficient weight to be determinative in their own case.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to have missed you out. Okay, we'll try again. We'll go for the parish councils again. So, as I said earlier, we have Tony Kilby from Finningham Parish Council. We've also asked Westhorpe Parish Council if they'd like to speak. Mr. Kilby, you have 3 minutes, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to say to start with, although precedence has been set by the recently completed development by Burgess Homes, next to the proposed site, we do not believe that it should have any bearing on the decision that you are about to make. Our objections are as follows. The performance of the developers during the construction of the previous project has not been particularly exemplary. His disregard to the strictures of the planning permission with regard to site control has resulted in the exacerbation of the flooding problem, dangerous activities on the road, and the construction of an illegal berm behind the site housing waste building material. The initial document submitted by Phil Gobbold, agent to the developer, makes great play of the fact that he had a meeting with Alex Scott of the planning officer in September 2019 and was told that the council's planning policy was out of date and the fact that the site is outside the settlement boundary should be ignored. I am not an expert on these matters, so I can be shot down about that, but it seems strange that you can just ignore something if you don't agree with it. He contends that this would be a sustainable development, but his argument is based on flawed information. To encourage residents to use cars, he states that there are 2 bus services in the village. This has already been mentioned this morning. One of which is a service to Bury St Edmunds once a week, 1 bus once a week. To Stowmarket, there is 1 bus a day plus 2 on Thursdays. That, gentlemen and ladies, is not I consider to be a service, a bus service. The village itself has no shops apart from a small farm shop. It has a pub which has a checkered history and is now up for sale again. There is a church, but there is no village hall for community activities. My colleague will present other arguments, but I'd like to draw your attention to a very important issue. Over the last 12 months, we've had disastrous floods in the village, one of which was outside the first development. Admittedly, the construction of this development exacerbated the situation, but this problem has been with us for many years. And it seems that Suffolk County Council are unable or unwilling to do anything about it. The problem lies with a sub-highway drain, which is obviously blocked or has nowhere to go. The village foul water sewage system is unable to cope with the existing load, witnessed by the number of times raw sewage has been coming up.
I'm sorry, the 3 minutes is up, so you'll need to have the final sentence, please.
Well, okay. The question of the raw sewage is the biggest problem out. The raw sewage goes into the River Dove.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Yes, Councillor Muller.
Chair, You mentioned that you've had a serious flooding instance in the last year. Did this flood any other properties in the area at all, please?
Any properties, did you say?
Any properties?
Well, you've seen the photographs on the screen. What you didn't see is that runoff was going into the garden of one of the houses opposite the the latest development.
Okay, and are you aware that you mentioned also about the sewage? Was the sewage also going into the property as a result of that flood, the garden? Sorry.
The sewage situation has been ongoing for a number of years. And it has obviously been made worse by the fact that we have had infilling development in the village. We've had lots of discussion with Anglian Water, who are the main people who maintain their village. They contend that the sewage system is adequate. However, the sewage system was put in a number of decades ago when the village was a lot smaller than it is today. We have a planning permission for a further 15 houses in the village, which you saw on the screen there, which obviously is going to add an additional load to the one that we're already looking at.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Morley.
You mentioned about the services within the village. You didn't say anything about healthcare provision or school provision. Is there any in the village? And given the two already identified sites in the emerging joint local plan, what effect do you think the additionality of these properties is going to have on the ability of the village to sustain those amenities? Thank you.
We certainly do not have either a school nor medical facilities within the village. The medical requirement of villagers is catered by Mendlesham or Bacton. Bacton has a very good medical centre, and so I believe does Mendlesham. Schools, definitely no schools. The nearest one is Gislingham, which is full. Bacton, I'm talking about primary schools now, is full also. So the school problem is major, a major problem in our area. We've had situations where siblings cannot even attend the same school.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on. We've invited the representatives of Westhorpe Parish Council to come today, but I don't believe anyone is here. Is that correct? No. Okay. So next we'll move on to an objector, Mr. Andrew Cardy. Mr. Cardy, you have 3 minutes to address the committee. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. There are a large number of valid reasons to object to a report. Primarily, in my opinion and the shared opinion, the report is inconsistent and flawed, making it an unsafe basis to make a judgment. Specifically, the report attempts to establish that the road outside the site is not dangerous, which is wrong, factually incorrect, and at best misleading. The data on the site used by the author is out of date, up to a year old. There have been at least 4 accidents that we know of at the proposed site entrance, at the proposed site, including one involving a car and a horse, which was within recent months. The recent speed camera data available at the time of the report shows vehicles approaching the proposed sites at up to 76 miles per hour, and with many in excess of 50 miles per hour in both directions. This would not be safe on the A140 on a straight stretch. So how can it be deemed safe in a 30 mile per hour zone on a blind bend on a blind corner? Those images do not do justice to the fact that it's a blind bend and a blind corner, because that Google camera is above the height of a car. Someone driving the car will not see that. They will be on a blind bend on a blind corner. Let me ask you, if an accident were to occur here, and these issues have been raised, how would you justify your decision today if questions were raised about why this was put in such a dangerous location? Furthermore, the local policies mentioned in the report all clearly and explicitly state that the application should be rejected. However, the report author disregards them by making subjective age-based judgments on when the local policies should be overridden by the NPPF.
despite the NPPF mentioning the contrary in paragraph 213, where existing policies should not be considered out of date simply because they are adopted or made prior to the publication of this framework. This is, to me, this is confused and illogical reasoning, and it calls into question the quality of this report. It's also key to consider that this development is not fit for the future. The Climate Change Committee is a statutory body which advises the government, and it clearly states in their 2019 report that local authorities should prioritise locating housing in areas which minimises extra traffic. It is clear the residents of this site will require the use of cars to access basic amenities. For example, the report incorrectly mentions the local shop as an amenity, even though it's rarely open, and it doesn't stock the basics that would negate regular car travel. It also fails to mention that the transport, as we've mentioned, is not sufficient to negate car travel again. This clearly demonstrates that the site fails the recommendations of the report and will introduce more car traffic and CO2 into the environment. Councillor Hicks, how will this help you deliver your manifesto pledge to protect and enhance the environment? Due to the lack of amenity, the site...
You have to have the last sentence now, please.
Okay.
3 minutes are up.
The site also has the potential for social isolation. It has many of the hallmarks that are known to cause social isolation, including lack of transportation and a lack of opportunity, employment opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, any questions for the objector? No? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We now move on to the agent, Philip Cobbold. You have 3 minutes to address the committee. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. This development was the subject of positive pre-application discussions with planning officers. Although the site is outside of the current settlement boundary for Finningham, your officers acknowledge that the Council's current core strategy and local plan policies are out of date because they do not reflect the objectives of the NPPF, and also that the Council's decision to grant planning permission on the adjacent land demonstrated that it considered Finningham to be a suitable and sustainable location for housing growth. This is further illustrated by the fact that the emerging local plan proposes 2 housing allocations in the village, one in Wickham Road, which already benefits from planning permission, and a second in Gislingham Road. Gislingham Road does not have a footway, and therefore future residents of any housing there would have to walk in the road to get to the village centre. This site provides a better solution for housing growth, as there is a footway along Westhorpe Road leading back to the centre of the village, the public house and the bus stops at the crossroads. This site is therefore has far better connectivity than the land which is allocated in Gislingham Road. It is also adjacent and opposite existing houses and so links well with the street scene. In response to the various objections and concerns, firstly the flooding in the highway. As you've heard, that problem is an historic highway issue for Suffolk County Council to resolve. It has not been caused by the adjacent development, and it will not be worsened by the proposed development, as surface water will have to be dealt with by a sud system, which requires surface water drainage to be dealt with within the site boundary. Secondly, regarding the impact of the development on the listed building on the opposite side of the road, as you've heard, this is an outline application, so matters relating to scale, layout and appearance of dwellings along the site frontage are details which can all be resolved at the reserved matters stage. It's also been suggested that the application is applied to avoid affordable housing. As you've heard, this is not the case. The site and the adjacent site currently being developed are in different land ownerships. The applicant does not own this site, the owner of this site does not own the adjoining land and never has. An application was not made for both sites at the same time because the land was not available at that point. And as you've heard, we've provided the planning officer with appropriate evidence of land title ownership, and we understand that he is satisfied on these details. Parish Council alleges there are issues with foul water, but if the current Anglian water system is causing problems, then that is a matter for the utility operator themselves to resolve. As part of the pre-application due diligence carried out by the developer, the Anglian Water confirmed that the connection was available. Parish Council's suggestion that their village is not sustainable does not accord with the District Council's proposals to allocate further land for development in the local plan. Although the village has limited amenities and a limited bus service, clearly it was considered suitable and sustainable, otherwise those allocations...
Your 3 minutes is up, so could I have the final sentence, please?
Different sites. Are they related in any way, the people?
Not as far as I'm aware. I think all that's happened is that one owner has seen the land next to his land being developed. He's liked what's being built on there, and then at a later stage has approached the developer to see if he would be interested in purchasing that site.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay, so we'll move on to the ward member. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. We're always told to consider each application on its own merits. So I'd like to just take a few minutes of members' time to set out the reasons why this application should be refused. Finningham's a lovely village. It's rural, a medium-sized village of over 200 homes, and with the settlement pattern spread out over quite a few miles of rural roads. And despite its many charms, what Finningham lacks are the services that other communities enjoy. As we've heard, there's no health centre. The old primary school is closed and is now a private dwelling. There is no shop, though an enterprising smallholder does sell a few items from her home. There is a pub, the White Horse, which has been open intermittently over the last few years. There's a parish church, but no village hall. So overall, we don't have the sort of facilities that would make Finningham a sustainable location. Residents are inevitably dependent on their cars to access services which are found in places like Bacton or Gillingham. There is a vestigial bus service, which is actually a minibus going back and forward to Stowmarket, and then the once-a-weekly bus through from Eye to Bury St Edmunds. But that's not enough to provide a realistic transport alternative to reach a range of local services. So I'm arguing that this site is not a sustainable location, as per paragraphs 102 to 104 of the NPPF. Now, the officer report argues that the principle of development is clearly already established here because the adjacent site for 6 homes has gained permission, and in fact is pretty much built out. However, this permission was gained during the period when the council did not have a 5-year land supply. We're now in a very different situation. The 5-year land supply is back. We have a joint local plan which has been submitted, and the examination is beginning later this month. Now, that plan does allocate 2 sites for development in the village, one of which, Green Farm, has gained permission and work is due to start sometime this year. And then there's another site off Gillingham Road that's been mentioned. So the village will experience a certain amount of development despite the lack of facilities. This site was put forward in a call for sites, but has not made it into the JLP. And the JLP is the direction of travel, and so I don't agree that this site should be approved just because the adjacent site was previously. This application needs to be dealt with on its own merits. Now, I just want to compare this site with 2 other applications nearby. That was in DC 21000998, which was in Bacton, very, very similar to this application. 8 homes, a countryside location on the edge of Bacton and close to a heritage asset. And that was refused on the 16th of April this year. And not by committee, this is by an officer. Reasons for refusal? Contrary to the development plan policies FC1 and FC 1.1 and the NPPF, an unsustainable location, there was an impact on the character of the countryside, harm to a heritage asset, and not enough information on access. Almost precisely the circumstances we have for this application. And then DC 19-05318 in Westhorpe. This was refused basically a year ago. This proposal would not provide a suitable location for housing in respect of satisfactory access to services and facilities. The proposal is not considered to constitute a sustainable development when assessed against the 3 tests of sustainability as outlined within the NPPF. So we've got our own officers on 2 very, very similar applications resting the case for refusal on the NPPF and our existing policies, be they out of date or not. So for consistent decision-making We need to do the same here. For this case, the road access will be problematic. We don't have a plan of where exactly the access will be. There have been accidents at this location. The flooding we've mentioned. To me, this is a speculative application. It's the last gasp of the developers before our JLP comes in. And I ask members to refuse it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions at all? Yes, Councillor Mansell.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned that this particular site had been put forward in the call for sites, but hadn't made it into the land allocations in the joint local plan. Maybe do you or do our planning officers know the reason why the planning policy team decided it shouldn't be taken further forward? Thank you.
I'm happy to answer that, Chair, if that's okay. So on page 53 of your report, paragraph 3.19, this came through in the call for sites as SS0807. It was discounted based on its poor connectivity with the rest of the village.
Thanks very much. Any other questions? No? Okay, members. So thank you for that. Over to us to discuss, debate and come to a conclusion. Can I just kick off by just asking a question? Because I just want some clarity around something, which is troubling me. So we're being asked to make a decision today on an outline planning permission around a heritage asset, but we have no information around the landscaping that could or may or may not protect that heritage asset. So we're kind of saying, well, here's a heritage asset, here's a blank sheet of paper, approve the blank sheet of paper, then the heritage asset should be all right. To me, it should be the other way around. So can we just explain why there isn't anything there for us to look at to be conclusive that we are protecting the heritage asset as much as possible?
So in terms of the application, it's made an outline, so we'd have the secondary application for reserved matters that would deal with that. But I think as well, if you were in a position where you were looking at the landscaping with all of the matters still reserved, you'd still be in a position where there are elements of the application that you might want to be aware of in terms of appearance, layout, scale, that would also have an impact on how effective that landscaping might be with regards to protecting the setting of the listed building. I think having them all as a group within a reserved matters still gives the local planning authority the degree of certainty it needs in terms of the impact of the application on the setting of the listed building. To that end, we would still have the further submission of reserved matters. All we would be granting here is the principle of development, with the details still to come.
Well, I'll leave it for others to discuss and debate. I find that difficult too, but I'll listen to others. Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I must say, reading the reports and so on beforehand, I did find the parish and the ward members' arguments about sustainability rather more convincing, and I think it's a pity we started to get into the debate in discussing sustainability and the weights of policies and so on, which I was keeping back from until we reached the debate. And it seems to me that we've got our old policies, CS1 and CS2, which have limited weight, and they are saying no, refuse. And we've got the joint local plan, which has limited but increasing at the moment weight, which has also said no, actually, we've got the settlement boundary and this doesn't fit within it. And we've got the less than substantial harm, and which inevitably there must be some of, although the Chair's expressed the doubt as to the degree of that because the landscaping isn't with us. So we've got those several reasons or policies, each of which are individually of limited weight, and then we finally got the very questionable sustainability of this village. And if you look at the assessment under the three legs of sustainability, really the economic, the social and the environmental benefits of this application really are very, very thin, each of them. None of them has got real substance to them. So the question we have to decide is whether all those limited weights combined should be outweighed by the precedent that was set at a time when we were under pressure because we had not got a 5-year land supply. And really, I would challenge the argument that the out-of-date policies are as significant in determining what happens as are the lack of a 5-year land supply was 3 years ago. And I don't really want to accept that those two, the tilted balance is as significant as the lack of a 5-year land supply.
John, can we just...
Somehow we've got to actually challenge that argument.
Can we just, on that point, just actually, because I mean, I think you've hit, this is one of the cruxes of the application, and I just would like to get a view on what would happen at appeal based on what you've just said. So, John, could you come in and just give us a view on... we need to hear, let's just hear what the officer's view is if it went to appeal on that basis.
I'm actually really pleased to hear what I'm hearing because you're exactly where we are in the debate of what is the material consideration that should take precedence in this particular case. And we have a range of material considerations. We have a future limited weight local plan, we have a past local plan of limited weight, we have the NPPF, which you can interpret both ways. The problem with the NPPF is that when we dealt with it a few years ago with the site next door, it essentially says the village is sustainable. And that's what, it is a precedent, yes, but it's not because it was there as a development, it's because of the considerations at the time. At the same time, we have the fact that we have a joint local plan coming forward that it does have a settlement boundary. So on the other hand, this is outside the settlement boundary, which you could argue means it's contrary to that future policy. But at this current time, that policy isn't engaged fully, and we're in the situation we have out-of-date important policies. And as an evidence base, we're about to allocate it as a sustainable site for development, or at least immediately next door to it. So if I'm standing in front of an appeal inspector, I have to argue the difference between standing here and standing there, literally within metres of each other, of one area is sustainable, the other area isn't. And I think we would find that extremely difficult to do so. What I would perhaps express to members is that the debate maybe needs to look at what is the actual harm of this development, or what is the unknown harm that you wish to understand further. You know, landscape, do you have sufficient information that you think in principle that this site wouldn't be intrusive to the countryside? Heritage, you have mentioned, do you have sufficient information to understand that relationship that you feel that reserve matters can resolve, or is it just too uncertain at this point in time? It perhaps is those issues that would give you an analysis that you need.
Can I just follow up? Is that all right? So I agree 100%. So the sustainability question is an issue because of what's happened next door. I get all that. But can you just elaborate on the intrusiveness of this site on the countryside, bearing in mind the lack of a landscape plan? Because, I mean, to me, that is a problem. It's a big problem. So how can I deal with that? Can I send it back that if others, and obviously we're still very early in the position, but if there was a view that that was a major consideration, could we refuse it and say we would want a full application to go to committee, not just an outline, to actually get all the detail, or is that just not in our remit?
The other variable here is this is up to 8. which just makes it interesting because ultimately reserved matters may only come in for 6. That hardly ever happened, we know. But ultimately, these could be 8 very small properties where landscaping is a dominant factor and therefore does mitigate the potential harm or impact of the development. This is the problem. This is why I do personally hate outlines. It is that leap of faith that we are looking at in terms of what officers are saying is we think it's a possibility that you could have a successful scheme on here that does not harm the listed building, that does not have an intrusive impact on the landscape, because we feel the details are possible that can be achieved. There will be a design solution somewhere. However, if members are not convinced of the same, that is for you to debate.
So can I just, sorry to hog the mic, but if that is the view of members, can you refuse an application on the basis that you want to see a full planning permission to be able to make that judgment?
You can refuse on the basis that I would suggest that you say it fails to demonstrate to your satisfaction that you have sufficient information to consider the principle of development.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to hog the mic. I just wanted to get to the bottom of my landscape issues. Councillor Matheson, if you want to come back.
Yeah, I think what I would argue, based on most of what Pateman G has just been saying, is the actual harm and what is the change from 3 years ago. I think the answer is we're 3 years wiser about how very serious climate change is going to be, and this is quite clearly going to be, if it's developed, a car-dependent development, and we should not be. I suspect that NPPF might have actually changed in the last 3 years on that point of climate change as well, and the chair's made some reasonable additional point about the impact on the countryside. So I really, it is not sustainable location to develop. We shouldn't take what we were forced it to do 3 years ago as any kind of precedent for what we should do today.
Okay, next up is Councillor Mansell.
Thank you, Chair. I completely agree with everything Councillor Matheson has said, so I'm not going to harp on about sustainability. And I think that Mr. Pateman G might have taken some of the words out of my mouth, because I do think that we have no evidence that the development on this site can be done in such a way to minimise what our heritage officers have said is a medium level of less than substantial harm. Often we're talking about low levels. Here we have a medium level of less than substantial harm. We know nothing about how the landscaping is going to deal with the situation of it being opposite this listed building. From the photographs, and I am familiar with that particular road, it looks as if that house is on a curved bit of road on the brow of a hill. Anything on that raised bank opposite it is surely going to affect the setting of that listed building. We also have the unknown of where the access is going to be. On this winding, curving road on an incline near the perceived brow of the hill. We don't know where the access is going to be. We've heard that there are already issues on that road, and okay, there have been 4 accidents. I don't know what the death rate was or anything, and we know that we have to have several deaths before anything's ever done about road safety. So I am in complete agreement with the ward member that this is a speculative application, and I actually think that our planning policy officers who've already assessed the site and decided that it wasn't connected to the village, and here we have the planning officers saying that it has a good relationship. But I really do think that we have not got sufficient information to determine whether there are going to be any issues with the heritage or the highways on this particular application.
Thank you very much. Councillor Muller, then Councillor Caston.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've listened with interest to the various comments on this one. I must admit, I'm not happy with this particular application at all. And I must admit, the comments made by Mr. Pateman G, I do agree with. I think perhaps we could refuse this one initially. I would like to see a full planning application for this. I agree with what the chair said about the listed building. It mentions in the papers about a green buffer. Well, we have a green verge there at the moment. You know, would we say just have a green verge, or would there be hedgerow planted, etc.? There's so many unknowns with this particular application as it stands at this moment, so I do not feel I could support it in its present form. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Caston.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with Councillor Muller on that one. This sustainability issue for me is not a great one, but the fact that there's a site next door that is considered sustainable, I think is very different. It was a very different time, and it was a very different landscape when we were operating the tilted balance, and things have changed now with the higher land supply. But the main thing for me here is, like you say, I understand that not everything has to be in an outline planning permission, but we usually have a fairly good idea of how it's going to work in an outline planning permission. This, I think, just tells us where it is and not a huge amount else. And it's very hard to, once that outline planning permission has been agreed, it's a lot harder to stop it at reserved matters if it really just doesn't work. But this grade 2 listed building here, a medium risk. So if it was a high risk, I don't think we'd even consider this. So I think medium risk has to be taken as quite a large risk for a grade 2 listed building. I'd like to see a layout that really showed us how that would look. I can't really see how it can be done now without impacting that at least a medium risk amount. So yeah, I don't particularly like this application. I think this is definitely not a clear one to approve. It's whether it would get, if we refuse it, whether it would come back to us on appeal. I think there's enough reason there that it wouldn't come back to us on appeal, but I would welcome looking at a more detailed application as well on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mansell. Yes, you want to come in? Yep.
Apologies, just two small minor matters just to ensure for the purposes of the record. In terms of the Heritage Officer's response, the median point is about impact. The harm of its significance is identified as low towards medium. I just want to clarify that for the record to make sure we're not getting confused. Ultimately, in terms of the official point of that, the less than substantial harm is the rating, if you like, that you take from the MPPF. That's one point. There's been a lot of mention about accidents. I don't know if this helps members, but just briefly, I did have a quick look on the crash map, which is the official recording of accidents from slight, minor and fatal. There is no recording of accidents along this road for the last 22 years, so that's up to 2020. There is 3 accidents recorded at the junction to, I've forgotten what the name of the junction is, sorry, the West Fork Road and the Washam Road junction where the pub is. There's 3 there at various times through that 22 years. That's not to say there isn't accidents along this road. It's just a case of what is recorded as evidence when it comes down to having a debate about that issue. Thank you.
Councillor Mansell, back to you.
Well, having listened to some of my fellow members on the committee, I thought maybe I would propose refusal on the grounds of we don't have sufficient information to know whether there will be a heritage problem or a highways problem, as mentioned by Mr. Pateman-G, that we could have that as a reason for refusal, is that we don't have sufficient information about this application in order to make a judgment on those issues. Is that correct?
Can I just check? So, I mean, one of the things we're always asked to consider at committee is, does the public benefit outweigh any harm. And I don't think we can make that judgment based on what's before us. That's my take on it. Yeah, Councillor Warboys, you were next.
Yes, I agree with Councillor Mansell, and I probably second that. I would like to put in another point, really, and it's about the principle of development. And as Mr. Pateman in the case... Oh, sorry. Forget it's on this. And, my apologies. Right. I agree completely with what Councillor Mansell has been said, and would like to support her proposal. I think my questions really arise around whether the principle of development has really been established. And I take on board Mr. Pateman G's explanations and the case officer's explanation. I've read through pages 51 to 53 several times, and I found it quite contradictory. Paragraph 317, for example, says policy H7 of the local plan seeks to restrict housing development in the countryside in the interest of protecting its existing character and appearance, which I think fits this situation very well. However, paragraph 3.8, the proposal site is located in the countryside and therefore does not accord with policies CS1, CS2 and H7. I assume that's a typo, but I'm not certain. For me, when Harish talks about residential development will inevitably transform the rural character of the land that positively contributes to the setting and significance of a listed building. We've looked at slides 10 and 11, which shows the approach into Finningham and the impact of the adjacent development. Subjectively, I think, the listed building is still in a rural location. Further development would actually sort of envelop it in more of an urban townscape. And I think we neglect these heritage assets at our peril. They're incredibly important to our rural tourism, the whole environment which Suffolk is regarded as. So I think the weight we attach to that and how we protect them is really important. Sustainability has been discussed. Finningham has got limited bus service. And I think though it is outside perhaps what we consider the sewage situation with regard to Anglian Water, who've sort of not really addressed it, I think it is of concern. And we talk about precedents. We've seen this matter arise in development in Finningham, where sewage was an incredible problem, and it did overshadow further development. And as far as I know, it's still not being resolved satisfactorily by Anglian Water. So the arguments about whether we have enough information to support this, I don't think we do. And I think in particular, the principle of development, I think that needs to be, for me, much clearer. I don't feel it's been established as solidly as we say, while the emergent joint local plan is not supportive of the development, and the fact that the development on the immediate adjacent side was considered to be acceptable. That is in a very different time, and it's a different space, and we now have a 5-year housing supply, which I should imagine was a lever in respect to the previous development.
Thank you. Can I just ask John Petmagee just to pick up all the different points that everyone's made? We've been around a couple of times. I think we've got to be careful that that if we're going to refuse this, we refuse it on grounds that don't shoot ourselves in the foot if it goes to appeal as well. And I think the question around sustainability with the site next door is going to be the big discussion point as to as to whether that is valid or not valid when we have a sustainable location being built out next door. But, John, can I hand over to you just to summarise? You've heard it proposed by Councillor Mansell, seconded by Councillor Warboys for the reasons of refusal. Could I ask you just to give your thoughts and maybe some summary on that?
I'm never sure this is close enough. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. I've been typing away while everybody's been talking, so I'll be honest with you, I've been constructing something that I think covers bits and pieces that people have been talking about. So bear with me if I get through this, to sort of give you something to consider. The first issue really that comes out most strongly here is the heritage asset. So what you're suggesting to me is that a low to medium level of less than substantial harm to the setting of the Hill House, which is a listed building, has been identified, and the proposal fails to have sufficient information to demonstrate no harm. The application also fails to demonstrate the public benefits of the development would outweigh this identified harm in terms of the requirement of the NPPF, especially paragraph 196. And therefore, you are finding it potentially contrary to both the NPPF and your policies, CS05, which is your core strategy, and your Safe Local Plan Policy HB1. That ties up the heritage point. A second reason you may want to consider further, listening to what Councillor Warboys was just saying, you're thinking about the settlement boundary, and I agree, we are into this position where what are the different circumstances here compared to a couple of years ago and the tests that were considered back then. One thing that is changed, which does make a difference, is actually the harm to the listed building. Within the NPPF, if you identify a harm to the listed building, you can actually, within paragraph 11, suggest that the tilted balance therefore does not engage because of the heritage asset. So a suggestion therefore might be that you're talking about sustainability in the settlement boundary specifically. You are effectively saying that this location is both outside the settlement boundary now, it is not an allocated site, and it will continue to be located outside the settlement boundary under, be it limited weight, the proposed joint local plan. And on this basis, the application is not held to be in compliance with your development plan policies, CS1, CS2, H7, FC 1.1, and they are held to, while they are not held to be out of date and do not engage the tilted balance, given the harm to the listed building and the provisions of the NPPF paragraph 11. So that is a way to engage them more fully in this particular site because you identified the harm to the listed building. But I'm being very careful about saying that. Would that help, Chair?
Councillor Mansell, your view?
Yeah, I am happy with that.
Thank you. And Councillor Warboys?
I'm happy with that. I think it implies further reading, but
yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else wish to just talk about this or discuss it before we go to a vote? Okay. Councillor Field.
Yes, just agree with that last exchange that the NPPF clearly allows you to build outside settlement boundaries in the country as long as the places you're building are not isolated, and this would not be isolated. But the comments concerning the listed building do seem to justify not building in this particular spot outside of the settlement boundary. So that does seem to make the decision much more secure to me.
Thank you very much. Well, on that basis, we'll go to the Robert Carmichael, Governance Officer, to take a vote.
Thank you, Chair. As with the previous one, if you're happy to, I can do it by the reasons as read out by the Area Planning Manager, if members are happy with that.
Do you mind if I send you the words? They're written down on the body. Does that help if I send you the words now?
No, you can send it to me afterwards, John, that's fine. So as long as all members are clear on that point, and Chair, you're accepting of that?
Yeah, so it's on the reasons that we've just heard read out by John Patemagee, and that's on the basis that we're going to a vote for refusal.
Thank you, Chair. I will now start the vote. So if members could please go to the modern.gov app and go to the plus sign in the top right-hand corner on today's agenda, then go to the subsection on voting/attendance, and then go to the light blue colour which shows the vote in progress.
Councillor Caston.
Thank you very much. I'm unable to vote electronically at the moment.
Don't worry.
Could I vote verbally at an appropriate time?
Yep, that's fine. We just got to your microphone isn't on because we've got more than two. So if I turn mine off, and then
It's for the proposal to refuse.
thank you, Councillor. So, Chair, with that vote received, I can confirm that as a unanimous vote for the proposal for refusal.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Sorry, on the wrong side of the page. Okay, last question. Do we have any site inspection requests that need to be reported to the committee?
No, Chair.
No? Okay, thank you very much. Well, I formally close the meeting at 12:17. Thank you, everyone, for your time this morning.